Right now, in living rooms across Manila, in apartments in Dubai, in basement watch parties in Toronto and Los Angeles, more than 2 million Filipinos are losing their minds. And honestly, they have every right to. Because what just happened on the clay courts of Roland Garros was not supposed to be possible. At least that's what everybody said. The bookmakers didn't give them a chance, the analysts barely acknowledged them. The commentators spent more time discussing the decorated opponents across the net than they did talking about the two young players who were quietly preparing to do something nobody saw coming. But here we are. Alexandra Eala and Victoria Bu just walked on to the most famous clay court in the world in their very first Grand Slam doubles partnership together and left an Olympic silver medalist on the wrong side of the scoreboard. The names trending right now across every Filipino group chat, every Manila sports forum, every tennis community from Southeast Asia to North America are Eala and Bu. And the way this story unfolded, it was not just a victory, it was a statement. It was a full-on declaration that the old tennis establishment no longer controls who belongs on that stage and who doesn't. The experts predicted one thing, the scoreboard delivered something else entirely. And the moment the final point hit the clay, everything the so-called analysts had confidently told the world was quietly buried underneath it. But to truly understand what happened in Paris, you cannot just start with the match. You have to go back. You have to understand the weight these two players were already carrying when they stepped onto that court. Because less than 10 days before that doubles match began, neither Alexandra Eala nor Victoria Bu was riding high. Both of them had just walked away from competition carrying the kind of losses that test what a player is actually made of, the kind of results that have sent other young talents spiraling, second-guessing themselves, retreating from the pressure instead of leaning into it. But that is not what happened here. What happened here was different. And that difference is exactly why the tennis world is only now beginning to realize what it's been looking at this entire time. Alexandra Eala's Roland Garros singles campaign did not end the way anyone had hoped. She exited the draw in straight sets, a tough defeat that on the surface looked like just another early round result at a Grand Slam, the kind of loss that gets filed away quickly, especially when the tournament machine keeps moving and bigger names keep advancing. For a player ranked the way Eala is, losing in singles at a major and walking away without a deep run could have been demoralizing. It could have created doubt. It could have had her mentally stepping back from the clay, from Paris, from the whole atmosphere surrounding Roland Garros in those days. That would have been understandable. That would have been human. But that is not what Alexandra Eala did. Instead, her response to that singles exit was calm, measured, forward-looking in a way that told you everything you needed to know about where her head actually was. The public messages she put out after losing carried a kind of maturity that felt completely out of step with someone her age. There was no deflection, no excuses, no dramatic reaction to a painful result. Just a clear-eyed acknowledgement of what happened and a quiet, almost unsettling focus on what came next. And what came next was doubles, and doubles, it turned out, was where the real story was waiting to be written. Victoria Bu arrived at Roland Garros carrying her own fresh wound. In Strasbourg, just days before the French Open main draw began, she had reached the final, not the quarterfinal, not the semis, the final, on clay, against Emma Navarro, one of the most rapidly improving players on the WTA Tour. Reaching a final at a WTA event while still being primarily known as a junior phenom is the kind of result most players would publicly celebrate for weeks. But Bu hadn't won that final. She had come that close to a title and then fallen just short. And for a player with the mentality and ambition that Victoria Bu has already made very clear, falling short is never something she lets sit quietly in the background. It lives with her, it drives her, it goes with her into the next match and the one after that. So here is the picture going into the Roland Garros doubles draw. Two young players, both carrying recent losses, one coming off a straight-set singles exit at the very same tournament, the other still feeling the sting of a final she could not close out. Not exactly the storybook setup you would write before an upset of this magnitude. But that is exactly the point, because what the tennis world consistently fails to understand about players at Eala and Mboko's level is that losses do not diminish them, they sharpen them. And by the time the doubles entry list dropped and revealed their names side by side on the same line for the very first time at a WTA main draw, both players had already done the mental work that most people watching from the outside never saw happening.
The reaction when the draw was released was not excitement, not from the tennis media, not from the broader sports community. The dominant reaction was something closer to sympathy, because what was waiting for them across the net was not a manageable first-round test. It was not a pathway designed to ease a brand-new partnership into the competition. The draw handed them one of the most formidable teams in the entire field from the jump. And when people saw the names of the opponents, most of the conversations immediately shifted from "Can Eala and Mboko make a run?" to "How many games will they actually manage to win before this is over?" Let's be completely honest about what Leylah Fernandez and Diana Shnaider represented as a doubles team, because if you minimize what they brought to that court, you minimize what Eala and Mboko actually accomplished by beating them. This was not a soft draw. This was not a pair of journeyman doubles players filling out the bracket. This was a serious, experienced, dangerous team with credentials that justified every bit of the confidence the tennis world placed in them going into the match. Leylah Fernandez is not just a name on a rankings list. She's a former US Open finalist. She stood inside Arthur Ashe Stadium in a major final and competed at the highest level the sport can offer. She has been on the biggest stages, in the most pressure-filled moments, and she has handled them. The experience she brings to any court she walks onto is real and earned and not easily rattled. When you're a young partnership stepping into a Grand Slam doubles draw for the first time together, being handed Leylah Fernandez as one of your first opponents is not a gentle introduction to the format. It is a test of the sharpest kind. And then there is Diana Shnaider, the 2024 Paris Olympic silver medalist in women's doubles. Let that land for a second. Not a participant, not a quarterfinalist, a silver medalist, earned in this exact city, on this exact type of clay, at the Olympic Games, the most pressure-saturated sporting event on the planet. Shnaider did not just show up in Paris and survive a bracket. She made a deep, competitive, decorated run through the Olympic doubles draw and came within one match of standing on the top step of the podium. She went back to Roland Garros this year, carrying an Olympic medal earned in this very city. The court was familiar to her, the clay was familiar to her, the atmosphere, the stakes, the weight of a Grand Slam stage, all of it was something she had already navigated at the absolute highest level the sport offers. On paper, this matchup was not close. Analysts did not just lean toward Fernandez and Shnaider, they practically dismissed the conversation about the other side entirely. A brand new partnership featuring Alexandra Eala, ranked 88 in doubles, alongside Victoria Mboko, a player whose reputation at this point was still being built primarily around her singles potential and her explosive junior results, against an Olympic silver medalist paired with a former US Open finalist with their combined experience and their established doubles chemistry. The pick was not just Fernandez and Shnaider, the pick was Fernandez and Shnaider by a comfortable margin, in a match that most commentators expected to be straightforward enough that it barely warranted extended analysis. What those same commentators failed to account for, what the entire prediction industry consistently undervalued, was the layer of the story that no scouting report had caught up with yet. Because Eala and Mboko were not truly strangers to each other. They were not two players thrown together by circumstance and asked to figure out chemistry on the fly in front of a worldwide audience. The foundation between them had been building quietly for years, and that foundation was about to become the most important variable in the entire match. Go back to 2022, the US Open Junior Draw. Two teenagers competing at one of the most prestigious junior Grand Slam events in tennis, both with something real to prove and the kind of game that was already drawing attention from people who follow the sport closely. Alexandra Eala and Victoria Bu met in the semifinals of that tournament, not in a casual practice session, not in a low-stakes early-round match, in the semifinals at the US Open Juniors, where every point carries weight and the pressure of the stage reveals exactly what a player is made of under fire. Eala won that match. She went on to lift the junior title, which in itself was a significant moment, a preview of the kind of clay and hard-court composure she was already developing at an age when most players are still figuring out the basics of competing under tournament pressure. But here's what matters more than the result of that 2022 semifinal. What matters is what happened in the years that followed. Because when two competitive, ambitious players share a court at that level, the relationship that develops afterward can go one of two ways. It can become a pure rivalry, two competitors who respect each other from a distance and save their energy for when they face each other again. Or it can evolve into something more valuable, a genuine friendship built on mutual understanding, shared experience, and the kind of trust that only comes from competing at a high level alongside someone who truly understands what that world feels like from the inside. Between Eala and Bu, it became the second thing. Over the 3 years following that 2022 US Open Juniors semifinal, the rivalry they had started out with quietly transformed. They kept crossing paths on the tour. They watched each other develop. They understood each other's games not from scouting sessions or video analysis, but from the lived experience of having competed against each other when the stakes were real. That history doesn't show up in any doubles ranking system. It doesn't get factored into pre-match predictions or broadcast analysis. It's exactly the kind of intangible that gets overlooked almost every single time until the moment it reveals itself on the court and forces everyone watching to suddenly reckon with how badly they had underestimated it. By the time the Roland Garros doubles draw paired them together for the first time at a WTA main draw, the chemistry between Eala and Bu was not something they had to manufacture. It was already there. It had been built slowly and quietly over years of competing at the same level, understanding the same pressures, and developing a friendship that carried genuine trust into everything they did together on a tennis court. The Olympic silver medalist across the net was about to discover that reality in the most public way possible.
From the very first game, for anyone who was actually paying attention, not just glancing at the scoreboard, not just waiting for the predicted result to play out, the chemistry between Eala and Bu was visible and immediate. These were not two players still figuring out positioning, still over-communicating between points, still working through the awkward early stages of a partnership finding its feet. They moved together with an ease and an instinct that took years to build and arrived on that Paris court fully formed. Eala set up on the deuce court, Bu owned the ad side. The split was clean and natural, and within the first few points, it became obvious that both players knew exactly what the other one was doing before it happened. When Eala set up at the net, Bu's positioning adjusted automatically. When Bu read a return and went for the angle, Eala was already moving to cover the space behind it. That level of court awareness between doubles partners usually takes months of playing together to develop. Some partnerships never fully find it, even after seasons on the circuit together. Eala and Bu had it from the first point, and the team on the other side of the net noticed. The early break came faster than anyone watching had prepared themselves for. Not in a dramatic, extended game that built toward a breaking point, but quickly, efficiently, with the kind of controlled pressure that tells a more experienced team that something is genuinely wrong with their prediction going into this match. The body language on the Fernandez-Shnaider side shifted the moment that break was secured. Not dramatically, not in an obvious collapse, but in the small, visible ways that tennis reveals when a team is recalibrating. Shots that were previously being played with confidence started carrying a fraction more tension. Communication between the two players took on a slightly more urgent tone. The early certainty that had surrounded their side of the court before the match began was quietly being replaced by something closer to adjustment mode.
Meanwhile, Victoria Bu was doing exactly what she has done throughout the most remarkable rise in recent WTA history. She was crushing returns. The same explosive, aggressive returning game that carried her from completely outside the top 300 women's players to the world number 9 position in the junior rankings in under a single year was fully present on that Roland Garros clay. There is a particular quality to the way Bu attacks the ball on return that makes opponents feel like there is no safe shot coming back at them. She does not give you a comfortable pace to work with. She does not offer the kind of neutral return that lets the serving team reset and control the point from a position of ease. She takes pace, redirects it with power, and puts the pressure directly back on whoever is across the net before they have had a chance to breathe. And Alexandra Eala at the net was something that deserved its own separate conversation entirely. After her clay court swing in Rome ahead of Roland Garros, after the quiet sessions and the detailed technical work that had been happening behind the scenes on this surface, Eala looked like the calmest and most composed presence on that entire court. Not just on her side of the net, on the whole court. Diana Shnaider, holding an Olympic silver medal from this exact city, was watching a player ranked 88 in doubles dictate the pace and tone of a Grand Slam match with the kind of settled, unreadable confidence that takes years to develop. The narrative that had been constructed before the first serve was hit was actively collapsing, 1 point at a time, and there was nothing either of the favored players could do to stop it. Think about that from Diana Shnaider's perspective for a moment. You arrive at Roland Garros as the decorated half of the heavily favored team. You have an Olympic silver medal in your bag from this very city. You have competed at the highest level this sport offers on this surface in front of this kind of audience. Your partnership with Fernandez carries experience, chemistry, and genuine pedigree. And then the match begins, and within a handful of games, you are watching 2 teenagers, one of them ranked 88 in doubles, completely control the flow of the match in front of a worldwide audience. The court starts to feel smaller. The points that should be going your way start going the other direction, and the 2 players across the net are not tightening under the pressure. They are not showing signs of nerves or hesitation. They are smiling. They are moving with confidence. They are playing like they have already decided how this ends, and they are simply in the process of executing the plan. That is a very specific and very uncomfortable experience to be on the wrong side of. And it is exactly what unfolded on that Paris clay from the opening game through to the final point. The momentum never truly shifted back. It built point by point in one direction, and the team that had been universally predicted to control the match found themselves instead trying to stop something they had not fully prepared for because nobody had given them any real reason to prepare for it. By the time the umpire announced the final score, the prediction industry had not just been proven wrong, it had been left comprehensively embarrassed in front of the exact audience it had spent so much energy confidently addressing only days before. Here's something that the wider tennis world still hasn't fully wrapped its head around, and it shows every single time a major tournament tries to process the scale of the Philippine fan base that follows Alexandra Eala. This is not a small, passionate community of dedicated sports fans. This is a nation of more than 100 million people with an enormous global diaspora that has been waiting for this exact moment for years. And when the moment arrived on those Roland Garros courts, what happened across every Filipino community on Earth happened simultaneously, completely, and with an energy that the sport of tennis has genuinely not experienced in a very long time. More than 2 million Filipinos locked in to follow the match in real time, not casually checking the score between other things, locked in. Watch parties organized by One Sports Party in Manila were not just filled, they were overflowing. Venues that had allocated space for a comfortable crowd found themselves managing far more people than the room had been designed to hold, all of them standing, refusing to sit, watching a doubles court on the other side of the world like the scoreboard was going to affect something physical and immediate in their own lives, because for many of them it felt like it was.
Tournament staff at Roland Garros reportedly noticed something unusual happening around the court during the match. The noise level around the assigned court spiked dramatically and consistently every single time Alexandra Eala stepped up to serve. Not a polite ripple of applause from a tournament crowd that was following the match on the side. A genuine, sustained, full-volume reaction from an organized group of passionate supporters who had found their way into that stadium and were not about to be quiet about it. Philippine flags were visible in the upper rows throughout the match, not one or two brought in by a small group of traveling fans. Flags, multiple, waving, throughout, on a doubles court at Roland Garros in a match that the tennis establishment had classified as barely worth following. On social media, the hashtag Eala Mboko, a compressed, affectionate combination of the two players' names that the community had already adopted as their rallying point, surged into the national trending list before the opening set had even been finished being played. Not after the win, before the first set was done, which means that hundreds of thousands of Filipinos were already posting, reacting, sharing, and amplifying the story while the match was still unfolding live. That is not the behavior of a fan base getting excited about a nice result. That is the behavior of a community that has been building toward this moment for a long time and is finally watching it arrive. Group chats from Dubai to Toronto to Los Angeles to Melbourne to Singapore and beyond erupted simultaneously. Filipinos who work shifts that put the match at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. local time did not sleep. They found streams, they found updates, they pulled up every available source of real-time information, and they stayed with it all the way through. Because missing this was not an option. Because this was bigger than a tennis match result. This was one of their own, on the most famous clay in the world, against decorated opponents, in a partnership that the world had dismissed, and she was winning. The level of passion that surrounds Alexandra Eala within the Philippine sporting community is not something that can be fully captured in a broadcast graphic or a social media metric. It is generational, it is cultural, it is tied to a sense of national pride that runs deeply through Filipino sports fandom in a way that makes the support feel less like spectating and more like participating. Every point Eala wins on that court is a point won by everyone watching. Every break she and Bu secure is experienced collectively, across time zones, across cities, across the entire Philippine diaspora simultaneously. The tennis world has produced passionate fan bases before, but what follows Alexandra Eala has its own specific character, and Roland Garros was the biggest stage it had ever had to express itself on. And by the time the final point hit the clay and the celebration began at center court, the energy that exploded across all of those group chats, all of those watch parties, all of those living rooms and apartments and phone screens in the middle of the night in cities around the world was something that no pre-match prediction had accounted for and no post-match analysis has quite figured out how to measure. The Philippine flag kept waving from the upper deck of the stadium long after the match had ended. Nobody was putting it away early. In the world of tennis, certain opinions carry a weight that others simply cannot match. A coaching certification can teach mechanics. A high ranking demonstrates results. But an opinion from Rafael Nadal on clay court tennis carries something categorically different. A weight earned through 14 Roland Garros titles, 22 Grand Slam championships, and a relationship with the red clay surface so complete and so dominant that the sport has never seen anything quite like it and may never again. When Rafael Nadal looks at a player on clay and sees something worth his time and attention, the tennis world should pay very close attention, because Nadal does not invest casually.
The reports coming out of the Italian Open earlier in the year pointed to something that deserves far more coverage than it has received. Behind the scenes at the Rome clay court event, Nadal reportedly spent time working with Alexandra Eala, not watching from a distance, not offering a brief, cordial exchange with a young player who happened to be around, actually working, going into the details of her game on clay, providing the kind of specific, precise technical feedback that only someone with his depth of experience and understanding of the surface can offer at the level he operates. Private, detailed, practical work between the greatest clay court player the sport has ever seen and a young player whose clay court trajectory was already pointing sharply upward. Eala herself has not been shy about acknowledging what those interactions meant to her. Her own words on the subject were direct and completely unambiguous. "Anything I can take from Rafa, I'll take with pride." Read that statement carefully. Not, "It was an honor to meet him," not, "He gave me some encouraging words." "Anything I can take from Rafa, I'll take with pride." That is the language of a player who is actively absorbing information, who understands the value of what is being offered, and who has the intelligence and the ambition to apply it. That is not a casual fan interaction dressed up in quotable language. That is a serious young competitor speaking honestly with a genuine mentorship relationship with the most decorated clay court mind in the history of the sport. And Nadal's side of it is equally significant because Rafael Nadal is not known for distributing his time and attention generously across the field. He has an extremely clear sense of what he sees in players, what he believes is worth developing, and what represents genuine potential versus surface-level promise. The fact that he chose to spend meaningful time working with Alexandra Eala during the Italian Open, correcting the fine details of her clay court game in private, suggests a level of belief in what she can become that no ranking number or broadcast graphic can fully convey. Nadal watched her move on clay. He assessed what she does well, identified the specific areas where his input could accelerate her development, and he gave that input. On the courts of Rome, the same clay swing that feeds directly into Roland Garros, the same preparation window that sets up the French Open campaign.
The results of those sessions did not take long to show up publicly. Eala's composure at the net during the Roland Garros doubles match, the settled, calm, almost unhurried way she controlled her position and executed her volleys, carries the fingerprints of detailed technical work done on exactly this surface in exactly this preparation period. That is not a coincidence. That is the result of a young player being sharpened by one of the greatest minds the sport has ever produced. On the surface, that mind understands more completely than any other player in history at the precise moment in the calendar when that sharpening matters most. There is something deeply fitting about the fact that Alexandra Eala's breakthrough performance on the Roland Garros clay, the courts where Nadal built an empire across more than 2 decades, came in a period where his influence was quietly present in her preparation. The 14-time champion does not give his endorsement easily. He does not invest his time in players he doesn't believe in. And on the clay courts of Paris, the tournament where Nadal became the most dominant force in the history of the sport, a player who had been absorbing his teachings walked onto that surface and refused to be moved. That storyline deserves to be told much more loudly than it currently is, and the tennis world is only just beginning to connect the dots. What you witnessed at Roland Garros in that doubles court was not an isolated upset. It was not a fluke result that gets filed away as a one-off surprise and then forgotten by the next news cycle. What you witnessed was a visible, public moment in a much larger shift that has been building steadily inside the WTA and is now accelerating fast enough that even the most resistant parts of the tennis establishment are starting to take notice. The old guard of women's tennis is not disappearing overnight, but the next generation is not waiting patiently in the background anymore.
They are not deferring to experience. They are not managing their expectations. They are stepping directly onto the biggest stages the sport offers and competing like they already belong there, because they do. Victoria Bu is 19 years old. 19! And in the span of less than a single year, she has gone from a position completely outside the top 300 women's players in the world to a ranking inside the top 10 conversation in juniors, with a WTA final on clay to her name and a Grand Slam doubles win over an Olympic silver medalist now on her resume. The pace of that rise is not normal. The pace of that trajectory is the kind of trajectory that makes the people who track talent for a living sit up and start doing the math on where a player is heading, not where they currently are. Most players who enter the sport at Bu's level take years to string together the kind of results she has compressed into a few months, and she is still 19. She has not even reached the age where most professional athletes are considered to be entering their prime. Alexandra Eala's development follows a different arc, but points toward the same destination. Her climb through the singles rankings has been built on the kind of clay court intelligence and competitive composure that many experienced professionals spend their entire careers trying to develop and never fully master. The ability to read a match while it is happening, to adjust, to stay calm in moments where the pressure is spiking, to execute a game plan even when the opponent across the net is more experienced, more decorated, and more backed by the establishment. That is a set of qualities you cannot fast-track. Either a player has the mental makeup to compete at the highest level, or they don't. Eala has it, and the evidence for that claim is now spread across multiple continents, multiple surfaces, and multiple opponents who had far more ranking points and far more experience than her going into the match. Together, they represent something the WTA has been talking about wanting for years without quite knowing how to manufacture. Two massive, untapped markets arriving simultaneously with players capable of genuinely competing at the top of the sport. The Southeast Asian tennis market, anchored by the Philippine fan base and the explosive support structure that follows Eala everywhere she plays, is not a niche audience. It is not a regional curiosity. It is a global force with 100 million people in the Philippines alone, and an enormous diaspora spread across every continent that is willing and ready to make women's tennis a primary focus of its sporting attention. Add to that the rapidly growing Canadian support building around Victoria Bu, a country that has been producing elite tennis talent with increasing consistency and whose fan base responds to generational talent with serious, sustained engagement. And suddenly, the WTA is looking at a combined global audience that tournament directors and broadcast rights holders cannot afford to ignore. The Philippine supporter base, in particular, has a specific quality that separates it from most fan communities in professional tennis. It does not arrive when winning is already confirmed. It does not follow a player onto a Grand Slam stage after the results have already justified the attention. It has been present from the beginning, watching the development, absorbing the setbacks, staying connected through the losses, and maintaining a level of engagement that does not fluctuate based on tournament outcomes. The Filipinos who were in that Roland Garros stadium, flags out and refusing to sit down, were people who had been following Alexandra Eala long enough to understand what they were watching before the rest of the world figured it out.
Tournament organizers across the WTA circuit have already begun to notice what happens to attendance, noise levels, and the general atmosphere of a venue when a player with a following like Eala's is scheduled to compete. The energy is different. The court feels different. The audience is different. And as both Eala and Bu continue to rise through the rankings, as the results compound and the profile grows, the scale of that difference is only going to increase. The sport has been searching for the next generation of players who can carry not just rankings points and titles, but entire fan communities along with them. Those players have arrived. The search is over. The Roland Garros doubles draw has not finished yet.
The bracket is still running, and the names Eala and Mboko are still in it, still moving forward, still forcing the prediction industry to continuously revise whatever it thought it knew. But the conversation around this partnership has already undergone a fundamental shift that cannot be undone regardless of how the rest of the French Open runs. Before Paris, the question being asked about this team was whether a brand-new doubles partnership with limited joint experience could survive a Grand Slam draw against serious opposition. That question has been answered, comprehensively and publicly, and the question that has replaced it is a completely different one. The new question is not about survival, it is about depth. How deep into these tournaments can Eala and Mboko push before the rest of the field makes the necessary adjustments and figures out how to slow them down? How far does the run at Roland Garros go? Quarterfinals? Semifinals? And if the chemistry continues to translate as cleanly as it did against Fernandez and Shnaider, is a Cinderella run all the way to the title outside the realm of realistic possibility? 6 weeks after Roland Garros, Wimbledon begins. Grass, a completely different surface, a completely different style of tennis, a completely different set of physical demands. The partnership that just announced itself on clay will face a fundamentally different test on the lawns of the All England Club. And then beyond Wimbledon, the US Open Series, back to hard court, back to the surface where Eala has already demonstrated the ability to upset top 10 players. Victoria Mboko, before this tournament even began, was asked about her long-term ambitions at the Grand Slam level. Her answer was not diplomatic. It was not the kind of carefully managed, expectation-tempering response that PR teams coach young athletes to give when they are still early in their careers and trying not to put unnecessary pressure on themselves. She said what she actually meant. I want to win a Grand Slam right now. Not someday, not eventually, right now. That is the level of belief that walked onto a Paris doubles court and refused to defer to an Olympic silver medalist. That is the confidence that built an early break in the opening stages of a match that the world expected to go in entirely the other direction. And after what the tennis world just witnessed in Paris, Victoria Mboko's stated ambition sounds a lot less like youthful overconfidence and a lot more like a genuine, measurable, timed goal. For Eala, the implications run equally deep across both formats of the sport. Her singles ranking continues to climb, driven by a clay court game that just received direct input from the greatest clay court mind the sport has ever produced. Her doubles resume now includes a win over an Olympic silver medalist at a Grand Slam in her first partnership appearance at this level. The building blocks are stacking up quickly, and they're stacking up on every surface, in every format, against progressively better opposition. The trajectory is not uncertain. The trajectory is extremely clear. The only question is how quickly the rest of the tennis world is willing to update its understanding of what these two players are actually capable of at their best. And behind both of their careers, the Philippine fan base and the growing Canadian support continue to build, not just in numbers, but in organizational sophistication, in the quality of the watch parties and the community platforms, and the sustained engagement that goes beyond any single result or tournament. These fan communities are not built on hype, they are built on genuine belief that has been maintained across wins and losses alike, across breakthroughs and setbacks, across the full complicated reality of following a young athlete as they navigate the most competitive professional sporting environment on earth. That foundation is not going anywhere. If anything, what happened at Roland Garros is going to expand it significantly. The final point landed on the clay. Diana Shnaider, Olympic silver medalist, quietly collected her bag. The Philippine flag kept waving from the upper deck. 2 million people who had been awake in the middle of the night watching a doubles match in Paris were now absolutely unable to contain themselves. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, something shifted permanently in the way the tennis world is going to have to talk about Alexandra Eala and Victoria Bu going forward. This is the part that cannot be taken back. Not by the analysts who dismissed them, not by the commentators who spent more time discussing the opponents, not by the bookmakers who never gave them a meaningful chance. The scoreboard at Roland Garros is a permanent record, and what it shows, a brand new doubles partnership in their first Grand Slam appearance together, defeating an Olympic silver medalist on the clay courts of Paris, is now simply part of the history of this sport. No amount of recalibrating the narrative or adjusting the retrospective framing changes the reality of what happened. The early believers were right. The fans who watched Eala upset top 10 players in Miami and insisted it was only the beginning were not being unrealistic. The supporters who tracked Victoria Bu's rise from outside the top 300 and predicted that she would announce herself on a Grand Slam stage before anyone else was ready to acknowledge it were not getting carried away. They were simply ahead of the timeline. They were reading the evidence correctly when the rest of the world was still defaulting to rankings and credentials and the comfortable predictability of going with the decorated favorites. The community that formed around these two players, the Filipino diaspora, the Canadian tennis supporters, the global tennis fans who pay attention to junior results and clay swing performances, and behind-the-scenes preparation work, that community earned its moment in Paris, and that moment has now arrived. What the tennis establishment is processing right now, sometimes reluctantly and sometimes with genuine surprise, is that the next generation is not interested in waiting for permission. It is not planning to manage its ambitions carefully to avoid putting pressure on itself. It is not going to defer to the established order of things simply because that order has been in place for long enough to feel inevitable. The next generation has decided, apparently without consulting anyone in the tennis media, that it is ready, and it has chosen some of the most public stages in the sport to make that announcement. Alexandra Eala and Victoria Bu did not just play a doubles match at Roland Garros. They sent a message that the entire tennis world received clearly and simultaneously, whether it was ready to or not. And the message was simple. The future of women's tennis has arrived. It is playing right now, and it is not waiting for anyone to catch up. The only question left, and it is the one burning across every tennis community from Manila to Toronto to Dubai to every city where a watch party ran out of space, is just how far this goes. Quarterfinals? Semifinals? All the way? Drop your prediction in the comments and plant your flag right now. If you have been following Eala since her first Miami upset or tracking Bu since her earliest junior results, then you already know what this community is about. This is where the early believers are, not the late arrivals or the bandwagon fans who are only now discovering what dedicated supporters have understood for months. The next match is coming. The next chapter is already being written. And it is moving faster than anyone, except maybe the two players at the center of it, actually expected.